Hello and welcome. I thought I would do a slightly different video today and just talk about some of the random grab bag of inspiration that crosses my mind and just put it together and put it out there for you in case it brings you any inspiration as well. I was recently watching a video by Wool Needle Hands. I'll leave the video linked below. I think you know who I'm talking about. She has a massive channel. So anyway, she did a video about sort of taking agency and where you find inspiration. And I realized that that is kind of, I spend very little time on Instagram. I definitely don't take Instagram or Pinterest at this stage as a platform for me to gather inspiration, just because of how the algorithm's designed to kind of show you what you've already seen, but in different variations, which can be really helpful if you're looking for a deep dive into something. But I think for grabbing inspiration out of thin air or just taking a moment to find inspiration around you, it's not where I would go first. So I thought I would just talk about some of the places I am getting inspiration from and what those are turning into. I'm not going to do this in any particular order. I tried filming this and categorizing stuff and it didn't work. So you're just going to get the grab bag of things that are inspiring me right now. It might be colors, it might be art, it might be trends, it might be a pattern, techniques, things like that. And maybe it'll bring you some inspiration. So let's just jump in to the first thing on my list. I've got my laptop in front of me so I can talk about it. Now, this is a color combination that has been sort of living rent-free in my head for a month or so now. And interestingly, it definitely reflects what the English countryside looks like right now, especially this sort of dusty mustard yellow. Maybe not so much the red combined, but basically I saw that photo at the bottom of this, the yellow trousers with the red shoes, and I thought that was such a cute combination. I love red shoes in general, and I think combined with this yellow, which is sort of an evolution from the butter yellow, I guess. It's this one, the one I've pulled out definitely looks more butter yellowy, but I think the other variations that I'm seeing online are definitely a bit more dusty, a little bit more almost olive toned in them. And this is definitely a trending color this season, apparently. I love it. I think it's such a beautiful color. I think it goes with a number of different things. I love this combination of this sort of deep cherry red and this yellow. I love the deep cherry red as well, but it's definitely the yellow that has been in my mind. I'm imagining just a big, fluffy, dusty yellow, maybe cables or something like that, just something super cozy. I think it goes great with blue. I think it goes great with the red, obviously. I think it kind of goes with greens, and yeah, I absolutely love it. I think it's such a beautiful color, and that is my first point of inspiration. The next kind of grab of inspiration that has been occupying my brain this month is what I'm calling hydrangea purple. So apparently purple is the color of the season, and it's funny how trends work. I do love seeing the trend reports and seeing videos about, fall, winter trends and all that stuff. I don't particularly subscribe to changing anything in my wardrobe because of that, but I do just take it as another point of inspiration. If there's an entire industry of people who spend their life thinking about how to come up with interesting and different ways to style clothes and put things together and come up with different shapes and silhouettes and everything else, it seems like a waste not to take that as inspiration. I do look at magazines this time of year and see what the brand campaigns are putting out, because I think that can often bring together a lot of really interesting creative minds. And I saw in one of these trends reports, or multiple of them, talking about this purple being the color of the season. And my first reaction was purple, fine. And then I went to Columbia Road the weekend. So Columbia Road is a road in London, and on Sundays they have a flower market. And if you are ever going, I highly recommend going early. I try to get there usually between 8 and 9, and I kind of stay for a minimal amount of time because it gets a little chaotic after about 9:30, 10. It starts to get a little too much for me. But they have beautiful flowers, and I take a lot of inspiration from nature generally, but I picked up these purple hydrangeas and they are absolutely beautiful. And having kind of watched these videos and looked at these things around purple being this color, I kind of looked at this and I was like, in yarn, this could be so interesting. Like you could pull together so many different variations of blues and maroons and purples and like just blend it in this way that it would have so much depth. And as somebody who pulls apart sweaters to reclaim the yarn from, often I get very like thin yarn that I need to hold double or triple even. And this just seems like such a fun way to think about that, like putting a blue with a purple and a maroon and like creating this multi-dimensional purple. I went and looked at the Knitting for Olive Instagram where they've got the, blends of mohair with their different colors. And I think there's a lot of really fun inspiration in the French anemone color. And then even just like anything blue or maroon colored, seeing how they've blended different things in with that, you get kind of similar effects. So inspiration number 2 is definitely the color of hydrangea purple, is what I'm calling it. And yeah, I can't say that purple was on my list before thinking about this inspiration, but I think it probably is now. I've just got so excited about the possibilities of beautiful sort of depth and texture with purple yarn. This might be one of my simpler knits, maybe something that's just more of a classic, and let that color and the marling or blending of colors or whatever I end up doing with it shine. So I can see that more happening maybe early Jan, Feb time. So I'm definitely leaning into the trend and letting myself be inspired by purple because it's a color I feel like I've neglected for a while. The third one is, we're just gonna jump over, is coming from, I've gone to a couple art exhibitions this summer and they're slightly different to what you normally get. So I'm very lucky, I live in London, to be able to go to art exhibitions kind of whenever I want. They're all around me. There's always something happening. There's always some level of inspiration. And I find I get not only a ton of inspiration, but also just like, I think there's some research that shows that you effectively, like your cortisol levels come down when you are looking at art and processing art. And I do feel that, like if I go to an art exhibition, I do find myself just like relaxing in some way, as well as just appreciating general creativity, even if it's not my thing, even if it's not my favorite painting in the whole thing. It's just appreciating that somebody sat there and created this thing, this piece of art. And the 2 that I've gone to this summer are slightly more grab bag of variations. So often when you go to an exhibition, it's like one artist and it's a expose on that artist, retrospective, whatever on that artist. The 2 that I've gone to this summer, one was the MFA graduate show for St. Martin's. St. Martin's is having some complicated things going on with its teaching staff, but the graduates still graduated. They did a summer exhibition. A friend of mine was part of that class, and so I went to see his work, but then we also just stayed and looked at the whole exhibition. And at that stage, I think in an artist's career, when they're really just experimenting and playing, and it's not about the commercial, it's not about the, what can we sell? There's some really interesting stuff that comes out of there. I can't say that like there was anything that I looked at and thought like I want this in my house, and there was definitely some art there that may or may not have been art. Like maybe it was just construction materials that were left in a corner of the building because the building needed some work. Who knows? But that's kind of not the point. I appreciate being around people who just look at the world differently and look at materials and pull them together and create something kind of for the sake of creating as opposed to any other reason. So that was one that I went to. The other one that I've went to and I try to go to every summer is the summer exhibition at the Royal Academy. And if you don't know what this is, it's basically a show they put on in the summer from sort of mid-July to end of August. It just finished. Basically, any artist can apply. So you often get, I think they get like 40,000 applicants who submit artwork to be part of the summer exhibition. And it's quite a lot of small artists. You do get a lot of big artists as well who will display their work there. But it's just this, like, I think they select about 2,000 pieces. I'm guessing on these numbers. I think it's about 2,000 pieces. But there's basically this whole exhibition, and it's a great place to find new artists you might be interested in, to just be surrounded by a whole variety of inspiration. So I went last week or the week before, and we wandered around and saw some great artwork. I ended up taking some photos of some of these. So you can actually buy the artwork. Some of it's very expensive, some of it's not expensive at all. And you don't really know until you look it up. So you just get like a little number and then you find the piece later, and if it's not sold, then you can buy it. There were a number of pieces that I just was really inspired by the color palettes, by the composition. I find artwork to be one of the best places to get color palette inspiration for things like a colorwork jumper or a striped jumper or something like that, because not only do you see the colors in combination, but you see the proportion of the colors in combination. So the first one that really inspired me from there was this work by an artist named Hannah Knox. I will put it on the screen. And it's just this painting of kind of a bow in this striped fabric. And it's a really beautiful painting. It was very striking. It looked even more sort of striking in person. I think that's generally the case with artwork. But I felt like this stripe combination was just beautiful and kind of unapologetically playful. Like, it just had that feeling to it. And it's not a particularly autumnal color palette. I think it's probably more spring, but I just wanted to park it away and just be like, some point that would be a really interesting and fun stripe combination to put into a sweater, or colorwork combination to put into a sweater. And yeah, it's just this combination of sort of yellow and teal and purple and fuchsia and lavender and all these colors, orange stripes, and unexpected beautiful color combination that caught my eye and then stood like in the back of my mind for a while until I put it down on paper. And that's part of this, is just get the inspiration out onto something that you can work with maybe someday or not. The second piece of art is this artwork by Antoni Malinowski, probably saying that wrong. Anyway, there were these two pieces and they were very small and probably a little bit more vibrant than what they're coming across on screen. They were definitely like almost neon looking, blue and the color palette on top of them. And there was just something about it that spoke to me. I kind of pulled out these colors and thought, what a beautiful combination to work with. I think we often think of color work on neutrals first and then like bring the color into the color work. Whereas I think this is kind of almost a flip of that. It's like this bright color and then bring the color work in as almost a softening to the boldness of the base color. The third piece that I was really drawn to was this artwork by Stephen Chambers. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of like balance. So this had kind of like a primary color in the backdrop and then a heavy dose of black and then these kind of like accent colors. So depending on what you're knitting or where you're going with the color work, I feel like sometimes that is the case. You have kind of like a dominant color and then like a main offset color, and then you have the kind of accent colors that you might bring into it. Now, obviously, I'm thinking of these as like, these are great color palettes for color work. You could obviously look at this as like, okay, you have a sweater that's in one of these colors, and then what do you wear with it? Like, how do you style it with other colors and other combinations that are maybe a little unexpected and a little different to what you would wear every day? And like this color combination, I don't think I'd ever have pulled that together, but it looks absolutely beautiful and balanced and stunning. Okay, so moving on to more fashion and other trends that I'm seeing, other kind of like techniques or things that are kind of bubbling in the back of my mind. This Dries Van Noten fall 2026 collection knitwear is just grabbed me for a couple reasons. One is the which I'll get to because I think it's sort of the textured color work. So using the floats to create texture while doing the color work. But I think also it was just this color palette. And the reason this was so interesting to me was because it's like, you've got the neutral background, then you've got these like layer of preppy colors, which are pretty expected, like very academic looking, very preppy. Preppy is the best word I'm coming up with for this. And then you have this like hint of color that is completely unexpected. So the blue and the like almost neon teal and then the pink just don't logically go with any of this. And yet I just find it such a beautiful, eye-catching combination that I think if you had like a Fair Isle sweater, this would just be really stunning. So that just brings me on to the kind of concept, I think, that I've been thinking about a lot. And I've had this one on my mind for a while. If you watched my kind of Mongolia content, I've talked about the Twigs sweater, and there's another one I forget the name of, from the same designer, who where basically you're using color work in combination with texture, and it creates just a more, I don't know, something a bit more rich. So this Dries Van Noten scarf, this is the other colorway it comes in, but I prefer the first one. There's some Loro Piana from past seasons that I find really beautiful. There's this sweater that I know I've seen other people pull inspiration from. But what I find interesting about it is the texture that you can create. Another one that I've thought about probably on a simpler level is the structured loop sweater from Other Loop. That one's come across my desk. I want to say my desk. It's come across my inspiration board. One of the things that I like about that is just the simplicity of the design. Obviously it's stripes, but the way that the stripes kind of leans into the texture so that you get that unique effect just with simple stitches. And I think there's so much that can be done with that. And I would love to do, as somebody who doesn't do a ton of like, is not a color work expert, like doing some level of stripes, but that create more depth to the fabric and more texture to the fabric is really interesting to me. It's really appealing to me. So yeah, textured color work I think is one that's doing its rounds in my brain right now. Another sort of fashion, are we calling it fashion? Structure, construction thing that's in my head, random bit of inspiration in my head, is this sort of like drapey, on the bias, knit at a knitting drape, I guess we can call it. I like that look generally. I've always loved a bit of like draping of fabric, and I think knitwear is often not done that way. I think probably for a good reason. I don't know how easy it is to pull off, but there's been a couple designs that I've seen recently. I guess the Made by Roche one is not particularly recent, but that one is sort of knit on the bias, so it creates this kind of angle to the lines, and I think if you do then like a rib texture or stripe, it looks super cool. Now the style of that is a little bit more, it's just not really my style, but the Loopy Studio one that I think is in testing now is definitely my style, and I could definitely imagine playing with it a little bit to make it even more my style, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing when that comes out, if that's something I want to knit. But I just love the idea of using knits in a more interesting structural way. If you have any recommendations for patterns that do this, I just love kind of an organic drapey look. So yeah, any ideas are very welcome. The final sort of thing that's on my radar at the minute is this concept of like an overlapping funnel neck. I know that Tuva Sandak has come out with this pattern and there's some drama around it, and that's not what we're here for. Funnel necks, again, coming back to the fall winter fashion trends, is a big one this year, apparently, in the jackets in particular. So kind of high neck jackets that do some kind of closure that maybe overlaps. I have always loved that look. I think there's something just extra cozy about it, but then you can open it and let your neck breathe if you need to. Yeah, these are just some examples of photos I've seen, but I used to actually own a sweater that did that, and I'm actually knitting one that's going to do that, which is the Carta vest. But I really like this look. I can imagine knitting something probably closer to the one in the bottom corner of the beige one, just doing something where it's quite a simple knit and then having this kind of overlapping neck that you could open and turn it into a collar, but otherwise could remain closed and just be extra cozy and delightful. And then the final little bit of inspiration that I was reminded of recently is that it's dahlia season. And if you, at least in the Northern Hemisphere and in England anyway, this time of year, I think we often jump very quickly into the fall colors, the very like darker and earthy and reds and stuff. But actually, like, harvest itself this time of year, this sort of September, October period, is often quite a lot more bold and colorful than that. Think like sunflowers and dahlias and apples and like just there's so much color in this harvest period, and I think I just like to keep that in mind. Take inspiration from that, as much as you might also take inspiration from also working on your kind of more autumn winter type of knits. I haven't let go of the bright boldness of color that I'm seeing around me in nature yet. Also, I think dahlias for me evoke definitely those more sunset colors, and I think that will always be something I enjoy and I'm drawn to. So those are just a few things that I have been thinking about that are kind of in the back of my mind. I think this will be a nice kind of short video. Let me know if this is something you enjoyed or you're interested in, or if you'd like more of like a deep dive on fashion trends that I take inspiration from, or, you know, nature I've taken inspiration from, or whatever it is. I like the idea of taking inspiration from more than just the patterns that are coming out. I like the idea of rounding that up, but I also know that inspiration is hugely individual. And if this was enjoyable to you, do let me know. And otherwise, I will be back for another podcast probably soon. Yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching.